Good morning, class. Today we're going to be looking at the aftershocks of the French Revolution. Um, so we know that Napoleon has become the Emperor of France. He's also conquered several different European countries. Well, there's going to be an aftershock. There's going to be things that are going to happen because of what Napoleon's doing in France. So there's going to be several European revolts because they see all these different revolutions taking place in America, in France. So in the 1830s, the Poles are going to try to reunite Poland. They are going to fail. It wasn't a success. But in 1831, Belgium's going to break away from the Netherlands, become their own country. And then in 1848, the Italians are going to revolt and they threw the Pope out of Rome. However, the French and Austrian armies came to the Pope's aid and made sure that the Pope was restored in Italy. At that same time, in 1848, you're going to have failed uprisings in Vienna and Budapest and Prague. So those revolutions are not going to go that well. In 1848, you're going to have revolutionaries. They press for a united Germany because we have yet to have the German country that we have today. It was crushed by Prussians. The Prussians did not want a united Germany, so that wasn't successful. It will become successful later on in history. So this is just an overview of the different revolts that were taking place in Europe. Do not have to memorize the dates of them. Just want you to be aware of the timeline of what was going on in Europe after the American and French Revolution, and sometimes during the French Revolution. Just want you to be aware of that. A big revolution that I think is very important in history is called the Haitian Revolution. Remember, Haiti is located in the Caribbean, the West Indies area, to the south of Florida, and we can locate that on a map in class so you know what country we're talking about. But the Haitian Revolution was, the original name of it was Saint Domingue. It was owned by France, or it was a French colony. It was a French sugar colony of Saint Domingue in the central Caribbean. Haiti is going to want to break away from France. The one unique thing about this revolution is it's going to start as a slave uprising, and the slave uprising was very successful. It's the only one in the Western Hemisphere that was successful, that is going to lead into a creation of a whole new country. 40% of the world's sugar came from Haiti, so it was a heavy use of slave labor. By 1791, black slaves outnumber whites 10-1. It was brutal slavery because remember, the sugar plantations it was a high demand crop, so most of the time they worked the slaves to death in South America and the Caribbean. They didn't care about the slaves. The only thing they cared about was the sugar, the money. So they didn't mind having to replace slaves. They didn't care for the slaves, so it was very brutal in South America and in the Caribbean. Keep in mind, North America was not as brutal as it was in the South, because they promoted slaves to getting married and having kids. They knew they wouldn't have to pay for the kids. It was free. Unlike in Haiti or in South America, they just saw slaves as property and they can be easily replaced. And so that's how the treatment of slaves were on Haiti. So August 22nd, 1791, slaves are going to coordinate an uprising. 2,000 whites died from this uprising, and 280 sugar plantations were destroyed. The white colonists are going to flee the country because they are going to fear their lives, because keep in mind, the slaves are 10-1. So they were not safe in Haiti. There was fighting from 1791 to 1804. So who are the leaders of the Haitian Revolution? Again, both of these individuals are of darker skin color. Francisco Dominique Toussaint Louverture was a former slave. He was the leader of the rebellion. He was kind of in a tough spot because although he was a former slave, he did own property. He owned property. He had a plantation. He made something out of his life. So, and he had his slave masters took very well care of him. So when the slave revolts did take place, he did go back to his old plantation to protect his slave masters because they did help him become the man that he was during that time period, because they gave him his freedom. He tried to compromise with France. He didn't want to totally break away with France at first. He said, hey, we'll still be your colony, but you need to ban slavery within this country. Of course, France did not agree to that. They are going to go into a revolution. However, he did want whites to return to Haiti. He did not want them to totally leave and not come back, because he knew that they would bring wealth, they would bring money, and it would make the country stronger. However, he was arrested by Napoleon and sent to trial in France, where he died in prison. So he's not even going to be able to go to trial, because he's going to die in prison before the trial actually took place. So the person that's going to take his place is Jean-Jacques Dessalines. He is going to assume leadership of the revolt. Finally, he is going to drive out France. He drove out the Frenchmen. And then January 1st, 1804, the colony was renamed Haiti for home, and he was named emperor for life. Whites were not allowed to own land or property. They were even discouraged from living in or visiting Haiti. He didn't want them in there, versus Louverture wanted them there because he said they would bring wealth. So how is this revolution so different from the other revolutions? It was the first successful slave rebellion in the Americas, and it was the first black republic in the Western Hemisphere to be governed by non-whites. Very important revolution. Moving on to the Latin American revolutions, you're looking at Mexico, Central America, and South America. Keep in mind, Spain colonized most of this area. So, looking from yesterday's lecture video, we know that Napoleon is going to invade Spain. So, Napoleon invaded Spain, caused many of his colonists to rebel against Spain. So, the first one we're going to look at is the Mexican independence. Series of rebel leaders fought for freedom from 1810 to 1820. In 1821, Augustin de Iturbide led an overthrow and was briefly the Emperor of Mexico. He eventually is going to be overthrown and executed himself. And then you're going to have Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. In 1794 to 1876, he was president of Mexico 11 different times in a 22-year period. So it wasn't straight. And he eventually going to be exiled from Mexico. So he's going to get in some trouble himself. Then you're going to have Mr. Benito Juarez. He's going to be the leader of Mexico from 1806 to 1872. He was 5 times president of Mexico. He is going to implement a series of reforms. He's going to limit the power of the military